With its release as a single on April 5th, 2024, Good Luck Babe has been a ballad of acknowledging past concessions and confronting an honest and ironic sense of the present, all the while accepting one's queerness. Chappell Roan created a powerful story that is edgy and bright, packed as an unforgettable single, and it pushed back on heteronormativity and feminine norms. Powerful, punchy, and lovable, the single debuted with an unforgettable album cover that is also worth analyzing to glean a deeper appreciation for the artwork and the artist, as well as the release of this song. Together, we'll examine why Chappell Roan's portrait is so effective. To do that, we'll reach for tools in both art theory and art history to create an artistic analysis of the image, and then to define parallels throughout time for us to appreciate why this cover just works. First, let's begin with the art elements. Of the many art elements, we're going to use 3 to examine this piece: space, color, and texture. Let's begin with space. Space refers to positive and negative areas of an artwork, or where an image is being filled and where it is left blank. Examining the use of space in this portrait, we see that our main character is staged in the center, negative space framing her. This negative space pictures Chappell Roan alone, and the blank beige wall behind her feels pale due to the extravagant outfit. The blank background in the vignette moving up through the frame pushes our focus away from all of the negative space, and we are quickly consumed with Chappell Roan's portrait in itself. The rule of thirds comes into play here as well when thinking about composition. This rule suggests that when we divide a composition into a 3x3 grid of 9 squares total, that the most interesting parts of the picture will be where the corners of the squares touch. Let's examine where those corners hit and when we apply those to our portrait here. We can notice that her eyes, the pig's nose, her lips, and her head, as well as the necklace, all lean towards these corners, on the left. Instead of Chappell Roan facing us directly head-on, staring us down through the center, she has a tilt-a-head. Not only does this create more visual interest, but we actually have some of our most important components of her costume all stacked in a row where those corners touch. Examining this portrait element with visual weight in mind helps us gain a little more insight as well. Visual weight refers to where a viewer's eye is naturally drawn when processing an image. We can see here that we're drawn to noticing the darker corner of the headdress, and then we move downwards in examining her facial features. The spacing of her face and the other larger objects in the portrait creates an intriguing and memorable look in itself, and the initial shock value of the headdress then guides our eyes down visually to examine the rest of the space. Now, let's look at color. Because the background is such a pale beige hue, the value being light and blending out into almost faded white, Chappell Roan naturally stands out in a powerful pop of maroon against it. When we refer back to value, or how light or dark a color is, or a hue, we can identify the darker values of the reds in the portrait being mostly contained on the left side of her face and figure, and the lighter tones being placed in the center. Ironically, the lightest tone of the whites and beiges is actually found in the pig's nose, which we might have assumed as being the most striking component of her face in this portrait. Instead, intentionally, it actually blends out into the hues of her face, appearing somehow natural to her facial structure. The maroons and reds used by contrast seem to pop vibrantly, moving through the different value tones in her outfit, creating an overall monochrome color scheme and making the image lasting in our mind. There's even a little bit of red that's actually been worked into Chappell Roan's face when looking at her irises, as there is a glint of red camera flash hidden there, a nod back to old school photos. Notably, the reds which are used in this portrait are not highly saturated, and instead there is more of a focus on darker versus lighter values, creating the portrait as a conglomerate. Peeling back the surface layer and considering symbolism here for a moment regarding color, these maroons and soft beiges together could perhaps allude to a bold statement of passion and femininity blended into one, not picturing feminine love or romance as a girlish pink, but instead embodying this as beige in a bold, dark red. Lastly, let's take a look at texture. Texture in art refers to what you might think of when you hear that word, how something feels. This can be a reference to brush strokes, grainy photos, graffiti lettering, and so on. Each of these media incorporate texture. We can imagine, thanks to visuals, what something might feel like, and that naturally evokes memories, emotions, or associations. We can see that the headdress is made of a type of velvet material, judging by the faded sheen and ripple effect that is in the fabric. The fabric does not reflect back any bounced light, but instead absorbs much of it due to the material and its hue. We can note sections that are fuzzy even, seeing the different values of red throughout the headdress itself, and if you have felt velvet, you can imagine the feeling of the material going back and forth in your hand, changing how the reflected light and hues appear to your eye. Velvet is also heavy, and so we can assume that this headdress is fairly weighty for our subject to carry. Roan is carrying a lot on her mind as she's carrying this headdress and all of the things that she's considering when singing this song. We can note that the headdress's texture harkens back to decades before with the use of velvet, and is most certainly a heavy cloth to wear on her head, creating a contrast of this weight and the rest of her outfit. This top-heavy approach to an artist's visual also draws upon an earlier reference from the 80s, like Kate Bush's album cover for Hounds of Love. Both successfully apply emphasis to each woman's head and mind, yet again showing a heavy weight on each of their shoulders to carry, or simply the depth of thought the character maintains. The dress that she's wearing is a soft satin gown, noted by the sheen and folds of the dress in the direct camera lighting. It contains many folds and a lot of cinching around her figure, creating a poofy yet contoured frame of Chappell Roan's torso. Perhaps this cinching and the texture is meant to bring us back to the present, combining the medieval headdress together with a modern 80s style satin dress. Together, the shining satin dress and the grandiose headdress make a powerful and lasting impression, certainly over the top, and the pieces do feel like they belong together. Finally, there's a single strand of hair which is visible in the light. It looks to be a soft ringlet descending her cheekbone. The hair feels bouncy and light, in direct contrast to the rest of the textured fabric around her face. This single hair helps to balance not only the implied visual textures of the piece, heavy with light, but it also assists with the overall composition of the portrait as well. Now that we've applied analysis using art elements, let's move on to art principles. Let's start with the principle of emphasis, meaning the components of an art piece that act as focal points which command a viewer's attention in a composition. Due to the hue, value, and size of the headdress that Chappell Roan is wearing, immediately we notice the weight and presence of this headpiece when we view the portrait. Already at the start, Chappell Roan is showing us a brash, loud, take-up-the-room presence to frame her portrait for this single. The single ringlet of hair that does descend her facial structure brings yet more attention back to her face and guides the viewer's eyes to examining her expression. There we see her sharing an ambiguous look with the audience, one that is tilted slightly back and away from the camera. In this way, her expression holds a lot of power, as it is not easy to decipher. It works well as a secondary emphasis point. We can't seem to tell if she feels scorned, apathetic, or coolly confident. Perhaps she is a mixture of all three. Caught in trying to puzzle out what our main subject might be feeling, it is intriguing to mention what we should, but ironically do not hold emphasis for when viewing this portrait. Using a double take, we notice that the blended out beige of her nose is a little larger than expected, and it is a little misshapen. It's not until we truly stare at her face for a moment that we note it is a pig's snout. There is a playing with the viewer here and a sense of optical illusion, with the pig's nose seemingly blending out into everything else with the outfit, so much so that this doesn't seem out of place, and the other art theory at work allows it to actually go initially unnoticed in the visual framework of the portraiture. In this way, through clever emphasis and staging, or an emphasis and lack thereof, Chappell Roan is challenging us in what we perceive as standing out, showing us that this is all simply a matter of perspective. As for balance, we can observe a use of asymmetrical balance or informal balance in this portrait. This kind of balance in an art piece is achieved through use of contrast or visual weights rather than identical elements or even distribution around a focal point. As previously discussed with space, the placement of Chappell Roan's body in the frame as leaning away and largely in the direction of the left side suggests that she is leaning back from the camera and the audience rather than towards it. Instead of chasing after a camera flash, Chappell Roan in this moment feels a bit like a statue, a snapshot in time, where she's lost in thought and we've interrupted her as she's getting ready to leave the back room of a concert hall. She doesn't seem perturbed by our presence, and we note that although there is so many components of her outfit, the heavy visual weights of the enormous headdress, the rich reds juxtaposed with the lighter weights of the faded out beige color of her face and the delicate single strand of hair, they all frame her in a moment in time which contains balanced visual weight and compositionally fits her personality. She has no need for perfect or symmetrical balance, and instead is halted in time and presents us with an honest and memorable impression of herself to attach to the music we listen to. There is an internal sense of harmony in this picture. There are multiple red elements in the piece which all echo one another and form a complete unit. Her red lips, red hair, red headdress, red-purple gradient layered upon the picture, and the red in her irises. The red does feel slightly overwhelming, perhaps intentionally. However, with the neutral tones of her face and the bright value shining off of her dress, the outfit overall comes together. Now that we have examined Chappell Roan's portrait with art theory, let's take a look at past and modern day media for an even richer understanding. A disclaimer that I am not directly a member of the queer community, but I am a dedicated ally and I am a fan of Chappell Roan. This video is my way of sharing this appreciation for her talent, and I extend that respect and appreciation to the LGBTQIA+ community as well. Now, let's begin our discussion of camp. What is camp? First, to understand some of this work in the visuals of Chappell Roan, we must review camp fashion and culture. To quote Susan Sontag, "The hallmark of camp is the spirit of extravagance," and she also writes that it is an anti-serious movement which can be embodied in fashion as shared by the LGBTQIA+ community. Camp is a concept celebrated and created by queer culture. Camp can be seen as extravagant, artificial, over the top, or a celebration and expression of one's queerness. Quoting Elise Goodman's article for the website Them, camp became part of the queer experience because it was a way for queer people, spurned by society, to connect in solidarity and survive injustice with humor. In this case, camp can be expressed and enjoyed through the lens of beautiful, daring, over-the-top drag fashion. Camp, writes Sontag, is a woman walking around in a dress made of 3 million feathers. Quoting an article by The Vulture, Wolper writes, stylist Genesis Webb and Chappell Roan connected over their love of drag, a penchant for thrifting, and their interest in a sharp meets soft aesthetic. Now that we have established the beauty, power, and resistance that is in camp, and the connection of Chappell Roan's inspired looks from drag and camp, we can look together at the design and costume choices which were a part of this single. To begin, let's look at that pig's nose. There is some fan speculation that the pig's nose could be in reference to a couple of different cultural icons. One reference is back to the movie Penelope, released in 2006, as it outlines the story of a girl born with a pig's nose. She treats herself poorly and is treated by her family poorly as well, and it isn't until the end of the film when Penelope shouts, "But I don't want to be a whole new me, mother. I like myself the way that I am." Then, the curse on her is lifted, and she is finally able to acknowledge who she is, regardless of her own previous insecurities or the judgments of society. Clearly, this idea of being ostracized or even alien to oneself could connect to Chappell Roan's journey to being open and accepting of her own sexuality. Another note on the pig's nose is that it connects Chappell Roan's styling and outfit choices to Miss Piggy of the Muppets. Miss Piggy is a prima donna and a fashionista, confident and iconic in her presence. Her outfits certainly did the trick as well, as over time she has become a cultural icon for a statement piece and embodies a gregarious personality. Miss Piggy has understandably been used as a visual in drag culture and has even been featured on RuPaul's Drag Race. Drawing the parallel between this look and the pig's nose, we can see that Chappell Roan enjoys embracing and playing with items and objects of cultural significance from all over, all the while echoing back her appreciation for drag culture and camp looks. Now, let's approach that final memento of history we've all been waiting for. What is Chappell Roan wearing on her head? And why or how could this bear any significance to the song? This headdress is called a double-horned hennin. The double-horned hennin relates back to late medieval Europe, originating mainly in France. This double-horned headpiece was an extension of the classic hennin, which was a cone-like headdress associated with medieval noble women. The two horns created a highly memorable figure, and it has been featured through various works of art throughout the Middle Ages into the Renaissance. The double-horned variant developed later as fashion developed too. It became especially popular during the 1420s to the 1480s. The structure was made by reshaping wire, wicker, or a stiffened cloth to form two tall, at times slightly curved, cones. Then, these cones were draped with sheer veils or with fabric. The hennin shape varied some over time, and some looked like animal horns, creating a unique appeal or even hearkening to symbolism, and other hennins formed into more abstract shapes. The height and embellishments of the double-horned hennin were markers of a social status. As we know in popular culture throughout time and today, adorning oneself with a crown of varying detail and degree can indicate royalty, status, or generally heighten one's appearance. By the late 15th century, the extravagant Hennin was so exaggerated that moralists began to criticize it. Society saw the Hennin as a symbol of vanity, or even feminine power, which defied traditional societal roles. This critique suggests a subtle form of rebellion for women at the time with this headpiece, where women's fashion choices were becoming a vehicle to express personal identity and rebuke societal norms. Over time, we have come to see Hennins and horn-like features portrayed in society, with characters from Maleficent to Loki. Many times, horns have an edge of danger or even evil. How interesting then, that this portrait also incorporates this idea of Chappell Roan having horns as well, not only marking her as unmissable in a crowd, but also calling upon these larger ideas of power or perhaps a witchy mystique in her image. Knowing this, we can then tie this conversation together to see that Chappell Roan's headdress is most certainly a double-horned Hennin, and with it she creates a striking silhouette, introducing her audience to yet another object or talisman of previous times, which she then uses to create a new meaning. In conclusion, Chappell Roan has a style which seems to select from cultural or historical relics which carry meaning and work them into a challenge or statement for her viewers. In her fashion, oftentimes Chappell Roan pushes back on something, conventions of society, societal norms, etc. This is all the while embracing a style which is true to her lyrics, her community, and her sense of self. If you enjoyed this deep dive in art analysis, please check out my channel, leave me a comment, like, and subscribe. Share with me your own analysis, your thoughts, and what we could look at next. Until next time, enjoy art so you can enjoy more of your life. I am Lindy Scholars.